turned on. Okay. So the last thing we're talking about is kites. Now, a kite is a quadrilateral with two sets of consecutive congruent sides. So it's a four-sided figure that has two sets of congruent sides, and the congruent sides are actually next to each other. So here, these two sides are congruent, and these two here. That's what's going to make a kite. Any questions on this so far? So if we look at this first question here, for what value of x, for which value of x is each figure a kite? So if we're looking at this here and it's a kite, well, it has two sets of consecutive congruent sides. So the side length at 17 would be congruent to which other side? 4x plus 1, because it can't be congruent to 21. 17 and 21 are not congruent. And if it's a kite, the sets of congruent sides are consecutive. They're next to each other. So that means 21 is going to be congruent with the 6x minus 3. So if I want to solve for the value of x, well, we can set 4x plus 1 equal to, and we can also set 6x minus 3 equal to 21. Yeah, we'll go on and solve it. So if we solve for, so we'd subtract 1 from both sides here, telling us that 4x is equal to. Then we would divide both sides by 4. Let's solve the other one too. So the first thing we would do is add 3 to both sides. Divide by 6 equals, so the value of x for this would be 4. So when x is 4, this here would be a kite. So when x is 4, this would be a kite because it would make this side here 17 and this side here 21. And if we wanted to find the perimeter, all we'd have to do is what? Add the 4 sides together. Well, 17 and 17 would be 21 and 21 would be. So the perimeter for this here would be 76. 76, if we added them all together. Any questions on this here? Okay. Well, there are two main properties that we have with kites. The first is that the diagonals in a kite are perpendicular. They're perpendicular to each other. So that means the angles in the center are all going to be 90 degrees. It also does work out that angle, okay, I don't know what that's doing. That was a little weird. The one diagonal that bisects the angles between the congruent sides, it will bisect those. It'll cut them in half. Angles D and B are not congruent, but it will cut them in half. Yep. The other property we have is that the opposite angles, the kite opposite angle theorem. If a quadrilateral is a kite, then exactly one pair of opposite angles are congruent. Now, the opposite angles that are going to be congruent are always going to be the angles between the non-congruent sides. The angles between the non-congruent sides in a kite are going to be congruent every single time. So we have these here. Now, it also works out that these two sides here are going to be congruent, these two segments. the segments from the congruent angles to the middle where those diagonals cross will be congruent to each other as well. Now, when we look at this first one here, we want to find the value of x. If this is a kite, we know the diagonals are what? Perpendicular. So that means the angles here are all going to be 90 degrees. So 6x plus 6 should equal 90. Then we can solve for the value of x. So 6x equals 84. And then we can? Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's how you got 84. No, I thought you said minus x. I probably did, but yeah, you did 14.
And that's it. Questions on this here?
That's all you did.
Yeah. For which value of x is each figure a kite? So we just need x to be 14. Because if x is 14, it makes this a 90-degree angle, which would make it a kite.
Whoa, that's the kite on this.
So in this here, we want to find the measure of angle D. We can also find the measure of angle F as well.
Okay. So
D and F would be congruent because they are the angles between this two sets of the non-congruent sides. Because the angles between the non-congruent sides are going to be congruent. So that means that angle D and angle F are going to be the same. Now, since it has four sides, we know the sum of the interior angles of a four-sided figure is what? 360. So we can say that x plus 115 plus 73 is 360 degrees. And now we just need to solve for the value of x. Now, x plus x is going to be 2x plus 115 plus 73 is 188 is equal to 360. Then what can we do next? We can minus 188 from both sides, which will tell us that 2x is equal to 272. And lastly, we would divide both sides by 2, telling us x is equal to 86. So the measure of angle D is
86.
and also the measure of angle F is what?
86.
Because both of those angles are going to be the same. Any questions on any of this here?
No. How's your hockey team going?
We're doing all right. Didn't win the last few, but we're still doing okay. Let's look at one more of this type, because I think y'all have got a decent understanding of how this works.
Yeah.
And we looked at this one here. Angles 1 and 2 are the angles between the non-congruent sides, which means they are congruent. So we know that those two are the same. And we can call both of those x and x. Mhm. And we know that all four of these angles add together to be 360 degrees because the sum of the interior angles of any four-sided figure is 360. Now we just need to solve for the value of x. Well, x plus x is 2x. 48 plus 101 is going to be 149 is equal to exactly. And then from here we can subtract 149 from both sides, which will tell us that 2x is equal to 1 gives us 50. Divide both sides by 2, and it tells us that x is equal to 105.5. Which tells us that the measure of angles 1 and angles 2 is going to be 105.5. Okay.
Logan's the one that asked me for a pencil.
No, okay, yes.
Any questions on any of this here?
Oh, no.
Because I feel y'all have got the hang of how to solve these here. Let's look at this one here. Now for this one here, we need to find the measure of angle 1, the measure of angle 2, and the measure of angle 3. Now angle 1 is right here, angle 2 is up here in the corner, and angle 3 is down in the bottom. Which one of these angles do we know for sure? Angle 1. Because what is angle 1 going to be? Angle 1 is going to be 90 degrees because inside of a kite, the diagonals are always perpendicular. They're going to make right angles. So all 4 of the angles in the center of this kite are going to be 90 degrees. So angle 1 has to be 90. Now it does work out that the angles between the congruent sides are bisected. So if this top one's 27, this bottom one is actually 27 degrees also. Now if we're looking at this here, these 3 angles do make a triangle. And the sum of the interior angles of a triangle is 180. So 90 plus angle 2 plus 27 should equal 180 degrees. So we can actually find out what the measure of angle 2 is by setting x plus 90 plus 27 is equal to 180. And we can solve for the value of x.
Well, never mind.
So we can do 90 plus 27 first, which is 117 is equal to. And then we can subtract 117 from both sides, which tells us x is equal to 63 degrees. So the measure of angle 2 is 63. What can we say about the measure of angle 3? It would be the same thing. It'd be 63 degrees. Now, it's not going to work out that that diagonal is going to cut those 2 congruent angles in half, but the parts will be the same. So these 2 angles will be the same, and whatever these 2 are would be the same as well. It's not going to cut them in half, but the 2 parts would be congruent to each other. The parts will be congruent to the other parts. So where angle 2 is and angle 3 is will be the same. Any other questions on this here?
Yeah.
Yes. Now we can't say anything about this angle here or these two because we don't know what this angle is. We don't have enough information to find the rest. But we can find these here. Any other questions about finding angle 1, 2, or 3? Let's look at this one here. Now this one here is wanting us to find the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 2. What is one of the angles we know for sure? The measure of angle 1, which is 90 degrees. Because where the two diagonals cross inside the triangle will always be 90 degrees. So we just need to find the measure of angle 2. But again, this here does make a triangle, so those three angles will add together to be 180. So we can say that angle 2 plus 65 plus 90 is equal to 180. So we can say 90 plus 65 is 155 is equal to 180. At this point here, we can subtract 155 from both sides, which will tell us that x is equal to 25 degrees. So the measure of angle 2 is 25 degrees. So we really know that this is 25, this here would be 25, and this angle actually inside here would be 65. Let's hold on to the quarters. Any other questions on this here? Do we need to see another example of one like this here? Okay, so let's see what's next. Now, really when we look at these two triangles here, what we covered today is that a kite, not triangles, a kite is a quadrilateral, is a four-sided figure with two sets of consecutive congruent sides. So if we have a four-sided figure with two sets of consecutive congruent sides, the congruent sides are next to each other, then it's a kite. And inside of a kite, the angles between the non-congruent sides are congruent. So that's what we've covered so far. We also have that the diagonals are perpendicular to each other. They're going to intersect at a right angle. It does work out that the diagonal between the congruent sides will bisect it, so those angles will be the same. It'll also work out that these two angles are going to be the exact same. And we also have that these two segments that meet in the middle are going to be the exact same length. And that's about it. Are there any questions on any of this here?